The guy didn't know what to say. Well, where's my daughter? She was betrayed by your wife, sold into slavery as collateral to keep you safe. My wife? Where's my wife? He started to fiddle with the simple ring on his finger as he asked the question. She was in that car behind us that got blown up right as we pulled up. She was full-blown cartel trying to kill us. The prior border guard's hand clenched tight. My daughter's still alive? Maybe there's time, Cole offered. I'll go with you. We can get her together. No, for once in my life, I need to do something myself. Without another word, Cole handed him the wristband. They both nodded at each other. He turned around and started walking as the ground rumbled. A second later, the prior border's guard pistol slid by as he walked. He picked it up and kept walking in the direction the motorcyclist had come, tucking the familiar pistol into his waistband and pulling his shirt over it. Chapter 8, Reboot, The Coming Weeks. Between the Pacific Northwest losing power and the civil unrest in the adjacent states, many vital internet trunks had been sabotaged, fiber severed, or routers shut off. Vital technicians had all left the confines of the Bay Area and Silicon Valley to find safer states to live in as the homeless, drug-infested population exploded. It wasn't long before the employed weren't left to support the unemployed, and the homeless left to find other people to babysit them. They tried to get other major cities for support. The few that made it paid a high price only to find the exact same issue in every major city. It wasn't long before the Russians came knocking for the land that they had been promised in exchange for support. With little in collateral and little to trade, the Russians answered everyone's pleas for the UN, NATO to come save the failing Bay Area. Mercs took any ship they could and landed with heavy forces and quickly and brutally engaged the various gangs and cartels that had pushed the remaining citizens back to a few vital business buildings. The internet infrastructure remained hidden behind several vaults, but it wouldn't have been long for those systems to take critical damage from the collateral fighting. Along with mercs, many holy women of the Eastern Orthodox background landed to combat the spread of Catholicism. The southern gangs and cartels had brought their own perverted version of the religion with them and were trying to spread it from Southern California to the middle. The mercs soon got bored, having swiftly overran with superior tactics all but the most combat-hardened southern cartels. The remainder of the cartels, comprised of prior Spec Ops border military but lacking in numbers and equipment, retreated to their stronghold in southern prior California. The super cartel called the entire area New Mexico, and everywhere they took north of the Mexican border got rebranded as such. They'd call it Nuevo for short. The mercs, finding nothing of value in Nuevo but death, had learned their lesson in history class of trying to take over useless plots of land and desert. They headed instead north, where resources and battles worthy of their training still existed. A few women went to go fight with the mercs, but most stayed to establish a religious stronghold. They took over the entire Bay Area and turned it into an Eastern Orthodox garrison. With urban camo habits and full-body armor, the Christians went from door to door with their donated merc and confiscated cartel weaponry and cleaned out the entire city. You could stay without converting, but all manner of perversion had to cease or you got sent south. They let most activity slide if it was between consenting adults, but there was no margin for debate if you hurt a child. That got you executed and hung up on the new southern border for what happened if you hurt children. Signs hung from each one's neck explaining what they had done. There'd been a debate on saving lumber by driving a single stake throughout the entire body, but nobody could agree. As such, they hung them from whatever they could find. It was usually the signs on the old freeway that they swung from. Sexual and otherwise assaults towards women and children suspiciously went down to zero pretty quick. If any cartel child soldiers were found and surrendered, they were reintegrated back into society if they wanted. Very few ever wanted to go back. Word got around and children kept surrendering to live at the massive convent. Parents were turned around if they could offer no proof of being a relative. The parents that stayed either became monks, nuns, or had to survive on their own. It fell on deaf ears if they couldn't provide familial or legal parental documentation. They all had phones, seldom were there pictures that matched the stories past a week or two max. Most sensible parents had phones loaded with pictures of their kids, them, family, and more. This was to prevent child trafficking mostly, but also to promote family structure. A real parent would be satisfied with their child finally being safe. The horror children, especially girls, had to go through getting to the border was unspeakable. The stories of the ones that didn't make it were even more sickening. Eventually the convent got most of the kids and the word got out. Displaced citizens eventually stopped trying to get through the hellhole dead zone and a more relative peace was reached. It ended up saving more lives having a common message. People had to stay and defend their own areas instead of relying on others, and eventually the situations got better. The stronghold ended up being plenty sustainable when the water rerouted naturally and the natural reservoirs filled back up. Eventually electricity became the priority, but knowledge was lacking. Chapter 9. Long-term strategy. Cole made sure the kids were dropped off and took off in his car that had been waiting for him in a secure parking garage near the border checkpoint. The Imperator concept car that Cole had found in an abandoned collector's bunker whizzed down the road in the empty streets. With speeds exceeding 150 miles an hour, he would be home to his family in no time. A family both in blood and forged through the main trials of the new normal. Cole had more people to get ready, because California was the first to fall, but it wouldn't be the last. Reagan didn't leave, though. She had a job to do. She rounded the kids up in an abandoned bus and got them out of there. The love eventually stopped, but Reagan kept going anyway. She took the kids as far as the fuel would allow, checking many fuel depots on the way, but all being empty. Everything was going fine, and occasionally they would spot fuel cans or tanks they could siphon to keep going. Care was maintained to keep all the kids safe and loaded back onto the bus for bathroom breaks and to quickly scavenge for materials. Eventually, when they were almost out of fuel, they came upon a roadblock Reagan didn't recognize. Impossibly large men with medium and large wooden furniture, rifles mounted with bipods and pointed at the bus as she slowed down. It was a measure to show she wasn't about to ram their checkpoint. As she idled down, they lowered their rifles to show they weren't going to grease her along with the other bus inhabitants. On the rooftop, she saw rifles with longer barrels, also with wooden furniture and scopes. They talked in radios in a language she didn't understand and surrounded the bus. Reagan noted that none of the kids were crying, having already gone through so much. She wanted to keep them in the bus, but they insisted on getting out and looking around. Reagan recognized some of their insignias as they walked around his old Milsurp Russian gear from the big Soviet collapse before last. Her ears weren't as sensitive enough to tell her if they were Russian, Romanian, Ukrainian, or what. She couldn't even tell if they were Eastern Slav or Western Slav. Reagan didn't recall, though, that they rarely, if ever, hurt children on purpose. The kids all sprung out with their gear, and the bus started to croak. The kids all got out of the way, and the guy that looked like the leader motioned her croaking bus off to the side so it didn't blow up or anything by their checkpoint. Reagan barely got the aged charter bus into the cleared spot they seemed to want it in when the bus finally died. She shut it off and went to hop out, only to get a gun in her face. A phrase was yelled at her she didn't understand, but she understood the hand signals well enough. She was supposed to stay in the bus. The area behind them was cleared, and the kids were taken in a warehouse. This stressed Reagan out, but there wasn't much she could do. There was no way for her to get to the back of the bus where her motorcycle was tethered, and she had no way of talking to these guys or the kids. She sat so many painful minutes, which seemed like hours, until a tall woman with long hair, tied back and wearing full battle armor, styled in a nun habit, came out. Not impolite but curt, the apparent Mother Superior proceeded to interrogate Reagan. A few guys in the back started working on it, getting her motorcycle loose in the back. Reagan tried to explain the entire situation about how she'd been in charge of the kids in a warehouse south in the dead zone. The guy scoffed, obviously being able to partially understand what she was saying, but not believing it. Mother Superior gave them a look that would cut steel, and they shut up. Steam started to come from the bus, and Reagan got startled and jumped out of the bus on instinct. As she stumbled out, one of the guys easily grabbed her with one hand. He obviously suspected her of being an assassin or spy or some such. Reagan wasn't sure. She said something in their language, and he held Reagan up from her mid-fall so she could see. Mother Superior gasped and simply said impossible. With that, the bus ignited and the Merc holding Reagan faced his back to the bus as it began to cook, effectively coddling her from any danger. Another shielded Mother Superior as they got away from the bus. Other guards rushed towards it with fire extinguishers to salvage what they could. Reagan woke up hours later to conversation happening around her. She was aware of wounds being treated she didn't remember from before. Through hazy vision, she recognized her location as an infirmary.